Stinging nettles have got a whole host of health-giving properties, and they're full of vitamins and minerals. If you make a wine from them and you're using those lovely young growing tips, you're going to get all of those health benefits from the wine. So we're doing this in late autumn, winter time. Most of the nettles are not of a good quality, but by cutting them down a couple of months ago, we've got lovely regrowth, and we've harvested the tender tips from them. To start with, we are going to steep the nettles and some other ingredients in hot water. Firstly, it's going to extract the colour and the flavour out of the ingredients we've used to give the character to the finished wine. And also, it's going to sterilise the nettles and all the other ingredients. And that's very important when it comes to the fermentation stage. The heat-proof bucket. And into the heat-proof bucket, we're going to put our nettles. This is around about 2 pints of nettles if they were squashed down into a pint jug. So that's the quantity that you need for this recipe. The zest and juice of 2 lemons. The outside bit of zest and not too much of the white pith. Nowadays, the yeast we use usually comes with nutrient in it, but the lemon was to provide flavour and also food for the yeast during the fermentation. And also a couple of inches of root ginger as well. And we're just going to cut that up roughly so that the water can get to it and the flavour will be infused into our wine must, the solution which we're going to add yeast to and turn into wine. I've made wine out of just about everything: rose hips, dandelion flowers, dandelion roots, hawthorns, blackberries, rhubarb, bramble tips. After many years of home brewing, I've settled on plum wine, spiced plum wine, a mixed autumn hedgerow berries, and also elderflower wine in the spring. And nettle is another favourite that can be done most of the year round. The amount of sugar that goes into wine will directly influence the strength of the finished wine. So I'm going to use 3 pounds of sugar in here with normal wine yeast to make 1 gallon of wine. That should leave us with a medium sweet wine which is around about 13% by volume when it's finished. So this is a gallon of boiling water. This water is firstly going to draw the flavour and colour out of the ingredients we've put in, and it's also going to kill any natural yeast and any other microbes which are in there which might interfere with the fermentation later on. It's important at this stage to make sure that your sugar is dissolved properly. And once all the sugar has dissolved, we're going to put on an airtight lid and leave it alone for a couple of days so that all the flavour and colour can be drawn out into the liquid. So once your stinging nettles have been steeping for a couple of days in the bucket with the other ingredients, it's time to start the fermentation. So the first thing we're going to need is some yeast. Yeast is readily available at brew shops or can be bought online, and most yeast comes with nutrient. It's important that your yeast has got nutrient, because otherwise what will happen is it won't complete the fermentation. It will run out of its vital nutrients before it's completed that task. For 1 gallon of wine, you generally use about a teaspoon of yeast and nutrient. And that's going to go into our demijohn. It's very important to make sure there aren't any unwanted microbes, any wild yeast or bacteria in our wine must or in the equipment we're using. So this has been sterilised prior to the wine must being poured in. We now put in our airlock. So this is simply a device which allows the carbon dioxide to come out during the fermentation but doesn't allow any air to get in. And again, that's all to do with stopping any unwanted microbes and bacteria from getting into the wine and ruining the fermentation. The yeast that we've put in will start to digest the sugar which is in solution in our wine must, and that's going to produce carbon dioxide and of course alcohol, and is going to turn this into wine. And we are going to put it somewhere warm for it to complete its fermentation, and that could take up to 3 or 4 months depending on the temperature, and after that we're going to move it somewhere cool for it to start clearing. After the fermentation stage of the winemaking has finished, the wine needs to be put somewhere cool and dark to start clearing. The yeast, which is in suspension, will very slowly settle down to the bottom of the demijohn and form a sediment. This wine here, which was made last year, is beautifully clear, and that's the yeast sediment in the bottom. Before we can bottle this wine, we need to separate the clear wine from the sediment, and this is a process called racking off. You need to get a previously cleaned and sterilised demijohn, and what we're trying to do is pour in one motion all the clear liquid off the sediment. So what we do is we pour very slowly and evenly. And as I'm pouring, what I'm looking for is to see the sediment in the bottom. And I want to stop the pour just as the sediment starts to come out. And that is about there. Now what we've got is some beautiful clear wine, and left in that demijohn is all the yeast sediment and the rubbish that we don't want in our bottles of wine. With the finished wine, what you're looking for is a clean, fruity smell, and you're hoping that you're not going to have any nasty, musty kind of smells. That usually suggests that something's gone wrong in the fermentation stage. So this has got a clean, fresh, fruity smell, and I know that it's turned out well. After racking off, the wine is left again to settle, so that any sediment which is left in the wine settles down to the bottom. And after it's cleared for a second time, it's time to bottle your wine. These have been sterilised with a sterilising solution, and I've got some corks here, and they've been boiled in water for 5 minutes, again to make sure that they're perfectly sterile. Pour your wine into your bottle. It's good to leave a small air gap, but you don't want too much air in your wine bottle, because if there's too much air, there'll be a lot of oxygen, and that will be asking for trouble with bacteria which make vinegar, which could turn your wine sour. If you keep that in a cool, dark place, that will keep for years. An important part of winemaking is obviously to try the finished product, so let's give it a go. So that has actually turned out really well. You've got a lot of distinct flavours coming from the nettles, and also a real zinginess from the lemon as well. And definitely it's got a good strength to it. So that's a successful one. This is such an easy recipe, and nettles are so abundant, I really do suggest that you give it a go. I don't think you'll be disappointed.